You can walk every day and still not be burning behind your visceral fat. This doesn't mean walking doesn't work. It's just that your body burns this specific type of fat at a very particular moment, and most people don't know when that is. Visceral fat is the most dangerous kind. It surrounds internal organs like the liver, pancreas, and intestines, and is directly linked to cardiovascular diseases, insulin resistance, and chronic inflammation. Unlike subcutaneous fat, the visible kind just beneath the skin, visceral fat is metabolized by the body in a more strategic way. In this video, you'll learn when walking truly starts targeting this type of fat, what science says about duration, frequency, and intensity, and, most importantly, how the body decides which fat to burn first. Visceral fat is the most concerning type of body fat. It doesn't sit just under the skin like subcutaneous fat, which you can pinch or see in the mirror. Instead, it lodges deep in the abdomen, wrapping around organs such as the liver, kidneys, pancreas, and intestines. It's silent, but highly active, and that's exactly why it poses such a serious health risk. This type of fat is strongly associated with heart disease, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, chronic inflammation, and even certain cancers. But the issue isn't just its presence, it's how the body handles it. Visceral fat is metabolically active, meaning it directly influences hormone production, insulin regulation, and even signals of hunger and satiety. In other words, it doesn't just sit there, it actively contributes to metabolic chaos. So why doesn't the body burn this fat first? Simple. It's treated as a strategic reserve. When you start walking, the body looks for energy from the quickest and easiest sources, primarily glycogen, the stored form of glucose in your muscles and liver. Only when those reserves start to deplete does it consider tapping into fat stores. And even then, the body still prefers to burn subcutaneous fat before turning to visceral fat. In short, you can be moving, sweating, and expending energy, and yet visceral fat remains untouched. The key to changing that isn't just effort. It's the right combination of duration, frequency, and consistent stimulation that prompts the body to adapt. In the first few minutes of any exercise, including walking, the body prioritizes the most readily available and quickly released energy, glucose. This comes from circulating blood sugar and stored glycogen in the liver and muscles. It's an efficient system designed for immediate energy, especially during short bursts of activity. The shift begins around 20 to 30 minutes of continuous activity. At that point, sensing the drop in glycogen reserves, the body switches to an alternative source, fat. This process is known as fat oxidation, and it's a key milestone for anyone aiming to burn body fat more efficiently. However, even at this stage, visceral fat isn't first in line. The body tends to burn subcutaneous fat first, as it's more metabolically accessible. Visceral fat is tapped into during more prolonged effort, signaling that the body is entering a state of sustained energy demand and needs to access deeper reserves. This point is crucial. It's not a single walk that burns visceral fat, but the cumulative effect of time, frequency, and consistency. If you only walk for 10 minutes a few times a week, you're unlikely to reach this stage. But regular walks of sufficient duration help the body adapt, and over time, it becomes more efficient at accessing visceral fat. Although visceral fat isn't burned right away during exercise, certain factors can prompt the body to access it earlier than usual. The first is walking intensity. A light pace can improve overall health, but when you reach a moderate pace, where you can still talk but feel you're exerting yourself, the body expends more energy and accelerates the shift to fat burning. Another key factor is your nutritional state during the walk. Walking in a fasted state, especially in the morning, means lower glycogen levels in the liver and muscles after hours without food. This forces the body to turn to fat sources more quickly, including visceral fat, if the energy deficit is consistent. Frequency is also essential. Sporadic walks rarely trigger meaningful metabolic adaptations. Daily walks, or at least 5 times per week, create a stable pattern of energy expenditure. Over time, the body recognizes the need to adapt, and one of those adaptations is improved fat oxidation, including visceral fat. Hormones play a role too, especially cortisol. Chronically high cortisol levels are linked to visceral fat accumulation. Activities like walking help regulate this hormone, reducing stress and creating a hormonal environment more favorable to losing internal fat. Scientific research confirms that regular walking can indeed reduce visceral fat. even without major dietary changes. One study published in the Journal of Obesity followed overweight adults for 12 weeks. They did walks of 30 to 60 minutes 5 times per week. The result? Significant visceral fat loss measured by imaging, with little change in total body weight. This highlights an important point. Losing visceral fat doesn't require extreme intensity, just regularity and sufficient volume. Short daily walks accumulate benefits. The body responds to repeated stimuli, and this consistency is more effective for metabolic health than occasional intense efforts. Another study found that 30 minutes of brisk walking, 5 days per week, was enough to reduce deep abdominal fat in sedentary adults. Researchers also noted improvements in inflammatory markers and insulin sensitivity, both directly tied to visceral fat reduction. Interestingly, participants in these studies didn't always show dramatic weight loss on the scale. This shows how visceral fat can be eliminated without obvious external changes, yet with profound internal health benefits. The body prioritizes removing this fat because it recognizes the risk it poses. In summary, science has mapped the path. You don't need to run, sweat profusely, or suffer. Just walk consistently, pay attention to duration, and let the body do its work. At the right pace, but continuously. Visceral fat doesn't respond to haste. It demands repetition, patience, and consistency. When done regularly and for adequate duration, walking becomes a powerful tool, not just for weight control, but especially for the health of your internal organs, where this fat settles and causes silent damage. As we've seen, the body doesn't burn visceral fat immediately. It first uses glucose, then subcutaneous fat, and only later accesses deeper reserves. However, with frequent walks, moderate pace, and a slight caloric deficit over time, the body learns to optimize this process. It adapts, shifts energy priorities, and uses visceral fat more efficiently. There are also indirect effects that speed this up. Better hormonal control, reduced stress, lower insulin resistance, and more stable appetite regulation. All these factors help transform visceral fat from a strategic reserve into everyday energy. In other words, walking works, but not in the instant way many people expect. The secret isn't intensity, it's consistency. And on this point, science is clear. Walking every day, even for just 30 minutes, can directly impact the body's most dangerous fat. If this video gave you a new perspective on how the body really works, leave a comment saying, "Is walking already part of your routine, or do you still see it as something too light?"